Joining us via Zoom from Sydney, legal professional John Sutton, and from John Sutton Associates, the man himself, John Sutton. John, we talk about 1,000 things on TheInformer, week in, week out. One thing I want to roll with you is the editorial we ran last week, and it was about the response that the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, made in light of the numbers, and he came out with the decision that originally all Melburnians, but the latest numbers suggest that from Monday of this coming week, we're going to see all Victorians, whether they live in the regions, the regional towns, or if they live in the capital city, they all have to be wearing a mask. How might we be able to use what we've seen, for example, private industry, to help us manage this lockdown? We saw the state government make a decision very early on with the quarantining at the hotels, not to use the ADF, not to use the police force, but to reach out there and find professionals, security professionals, who they thought would carry the day and be able to fill in. We've since found out that was an absolute disaster, and we've seen what was a manageable situation absolutely become a bit of a catastrophe, and the numbers that we're seeing emerging every day from this COVID pandemic contagion just climb every day. What do you make of that? What did you make of the original decision, and what do you stand and believe is a reasonable and fair strategy going forward?
George, I'm going to digress, and I'm going to make comment first of all, because you suggested, or you told people that I'm from Sydney, and you've asked me to comment on a Melbourne problem. And what I don't want to do, and I underline that, is get into some kind of mudslinging competition between New South Wales doing something better than Victoria, because that is unhelpful, unfair. Anyone could, having made a wrong decision, be in this position. And I grew up in London, and I lived in Melbourne for a number of years. So
in fact, you were a police officer at the time, were you not?
I was a police officer in London. I was a prosecutor in Victoria.
Wow. Okay, so you've covered all the bases.
Well, yeah, so I'd like to think I'm bringing an independent, not a state-biased view to this. Look, it's intrigued me, the most socialist state that we have in this country, in my opinion, Daniel Andrews' government, turns to private enterprise to do a job that was tasked to public institutions in every other state and territory, being the police and the military. I mean, and I know I'm cynical, and I confess I'm cynical, but when I see private enterprise being used for public purpose, especially in circumstances where nobody else has done it, the cynic in me asks the question, why is that? And perhaps it is because someone genuinely believed that an untrained, uneducated, minimum waged task force of private security guards were better for set for purpose than a highly trained police force and military people. Perhaps that was a genuine belief by someone, but my goodness, what an unfounded belief it is. So
John,
that leads
John,
me
can I just interrupt there for a moment? We should add that some of those untrained security guards got their invite to become part of this quarantine group of professionals via WhatsApp.
Indeed.
How do you go enlisting people that you need fit for purpose via WhatsApp? What's going on?
Well, you know, there are many ways for people to communicate. I mean, during COVID, I've heard of people being terminated by WhatsApp and text message. So perhaps that isn't in and of itself something. But the question really that beggars belief is, why would you take the safety and security of a state and risk it with comparatively untrained private enterprise when you have people who are trained and indeed have the power and the authority to maintain proper control using COVID regulations that have been created under state legislation, under health legislation? It beggars belief. And then to have the audacity to say, well, you know, we're not going to take any responsibility. We're going to set up ourselves a little commission here, a little inquiry that hopefully, fingers crossed, boys and girls, will take so long that the heat will go out of it, so that when we get found to be perhaps inept at best, and perhaps there are other explanations, the heat will have gone out of it and no one will worry too much. But of course, the problem is the ineptness of the initial decision appears to have led to what is today an absolute travesty: 723 new cases and 13 deaths. And that's just the latest tip of the iceberg. Really, this inquiry needs to go into the ins and outs of the whole of the contract process, the awarding of the contract, the remuneration of the contract, and follow all of the leads to the very ends of the tips of the web. Because I confess, I'm a cynic and I'm making no allegations, but as a former police officer, as a former investigator, and as a former prosecutor, the spidey senses, to use the web analogy, are tingling, and I really rhetorically wonder where it will end up and what the results of an inquiry, a proper, competent, fully investigative inquiry, will tell us.
I'm glad you went down that path and explained us and gave us a background from your perspective. From Sydney, the view must be even harsher when you start to take in the calamity that has befallen our aged care sector in Victoria. We know there's a Royal Commission. I think the terms of the Royal Commission were pretty narrow, but at the same time, one of the things that emerged in the very early part of the Royal Commission was there was serious neglect in that sector. Well, the latest numbers would suggest not only is that right on the money, but there was no movement by management, it seems, in these institutions when the warnings from overseas started to appear. I mean, we saw Italy go down, we saw Spain go down, then it was Britain, then it was Ireland, and then of course in America. And still, nobody thought enough of the possible contagion and pandemic to do anything about it, to start forward thinking and preparing, giving people, access to PPE and demanding that in that very close space with people who have compromised systems, the mask would be the minimum attire, not the last bit of attire to put in.
Well, indeed, and to come back to your last point first, masks, I'm not medically trained or qualified, and I understand that they are, if we think of it, the last barrier, although we're made out to be the last barrier. We're all being told we didn't need to wear them. And now in Victoria, of course, the order is everyone everywhere in public must wear one. I don't really understand why we're not being told to wear them in New South Wales. But again, I want to digress. I do not understand for one moment where these people in Victoria, and I'm sure they are in the rest of the country as well, but unfortunately, poor old Victoria is copping the brunt of the publicity, where they get their notional human rights from that they don't have to wear a mask. Firstly, where do they get their knowledge of human rights? From the Beano, from Whizzer and Chips, from New Idea? I mean, another brain cell might double their capacity, with great respect, and that as high as I can put the respect for them, to suggest that these people are lying about deaths. I mean, I read today this 99% Unite group of academic nonplussed morons are suggesting that the families of people who are dying in COVID are being paid by the government to say, hey, my relative died of COVID, because that covers up a greater plan, which is that in fact what everyone's dying of is signals from the 5G networks. I mean, seriously, the fact that they are trying to suggest there is some lawful constitutional right to not wear a mask, and when that doesn't work, they want to suggest that there is a government conspiracy killing these people around. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people have died around the world? And what are they seriously suggesting, that every single government in the world is paying people to lie about it? I mean, this country can't get 7 states and territories heads of government to agree on pushing a ball up a hill. I mean, how do we suddenly get to the stage that I'm sorry, I'm restraining my language, because in a pub it'll be very different, but
That's
of course
right.
we can't go to pubs. They're even selling rocks for $120 that protect you from 5G electromagnetic radiation. And what is more amazing is there are idiots out there who are paying money. I mean, this is the Nigerian prince is meeting me off the plane and I'm sorry, I'm going to get married kind of ridiculousness. Now, I know there's a mug born every minute, but how many do we have to see on TV? And why is it that they are allowed to get this publicity? With great respect to what we're doing at the moment, George, I think the media should just shut these morons down. Do not give them oxygen. Do not let them breathe on TV, and do not encourage their very, very stupid, harmful and silly messages.